In the land of ancient Israel, a land tormented by drought and plagued by idolatry, there walked a man unlike any other, a prophet clothed in rough garments, with piercing eyes that seemed to see the very heart of men. His name was Elijah. Elijah was no ordinary man. He was a man of fire, a man of power, a man who called down flames from heaven and outran the fastest horses in the kingdom. But how did this happen? How did one man carry such power and authority? Our story begins in the shadowed hills of Gilead, where Elijah first received his call from God. The kingdom of Israel had fallen into darkness. King Ahab ruled the land, but his heart was far from God. Alongside his wicked wife, Queen Jezebel, they filled the kingdom with idols, promoting the worship of Baal, a false god that demanded loyalty in exchange for empty promises. The people turned away from the Lord, embracing corruption and wickedness. Then one day, Elijah emerged from the wilderness, his voice like thunder. As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, there will be no dew or rain in the land except at my word. With those words, Elijah vanished, retreating eastward to the brook Chariot. There God sustained him through miraculous means. Ravens brought him bread and meat each morning and evening, and he drank from the brook. But as the drought tightened its grip on the land, the brook eventually dried up. God then sent Elijah to a widow in the town of Zarephath. When Elijah arrived, the widow was gathering sticks to prepare her final meal. She had only a handful of flour and a small jar of oil left, barely enough to feed herself and her son. "Please," Elijah said, "bring me some water and a small loaf of bread." The widow hesitated. "I have nothing but a little flour and oil, just enough for one final meal for my son and me. After that, we will die." But Elijah spoke words that shook her spirit. "Do not be afraid. Make a small loaf for me first, and then prepare food for yourself and your son. For the Lord has promised, the jar of oil will not run dry, and the flour will not be spent until the day he sends rain upon the earth." And just as Elijah said, the oil flowed and the flour remained, providing for the household for many days. Yet tragedy soon struck. The widow's son fell gravely ill, and soon the boy lay lifeless in his mother's arms. "Why did you come here, man of God?" she cried. "Did you come to remind me of my sin and bring death upon my son?" Elijah took the boy from her arms and carried him to his room. There he stretched himself over the lifeless body and cried out to God, "O Lord my God, let this child's life return to him." 3 times Elijah prayed, and suddenly the boy's chest rose. Breath returned and the child was alive. The widow fell to her knees, crying out, "Now I know that you are a man of God and that his word is truth." Meanwhile, the land was dry as dust. 3 long years had passed, and the earth was cracked and lifeless. The people were suffering. Crops had failed, livestock had perished, and families had been reduced to desperation. In the streets of Samaria, children cried out for water that no longer existed. Elijah himself faced moments of doubt. He had obeyed God's commands, yet the drought seemed endless. Alone in the wilderness, he knelt beneath a dry tree and prayed, "Lord, am I truly your servant? Have I failed you?" But then one day God spoke again to Elijah, "Go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the land." Elijah returned to confront the wicked king. Ahab greeted him with scorn. "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" "It is not I who trouble Israel," Elijah answered, "but you and your father's house by abandoning the commandments of the Lord. Gather the prophets of Baal and the people of Israel to Mount Carmel, and we will see whose God is true." The people gathered at the foot of the mountain. There stood 450 prophets of Baal against Elijah, the lone prophet of the Lord. Elijah spoke boldly, How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." The people stood silent. "Prepare your altar," Elijah instructed the prophets of Baal. "Call upon your God, and I will call upon the Lord." The prophets of Baal cried out from morning until noon. They danced, they shouted, they cut themselves with swords until their blood flowed. But no voice answered, no fire fell. Then Elijah approached the altar of the Lord. He repaired it with 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel. He dug a trench around it and drenched the altar with water, not once, not twice, but 3 times, until the trench overflowed. Then Elijah lifted his face to heaven and prayed, "O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel. Answer me, O Lord, that this people may know that you are turning their hearts back to you." Suddenly fire roared down from heaven, consuming the offering, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench. The people fell to their faces, crying out, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" The prophets of Baal were seized and destroyed, and the heavens, once dry and still, began to darken. Elijah turned to King Ahab and said, "Go, eat and drink, for I hear the sound of heavy rain." Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel and knelt in prayer. 7 times he sent his servant to look toward the sea. On the 7th time the servant reported, "I see a cloud as small as a man's hand rising from the sea." "Go quickly," Elijah ordered. "Tell Ahab to prepare his chariot before the storm overtakes him." Then the winds howled, the sky turned black, and the rain poured down in torrents. As King Ahab's chariot sped toward Jezreel, something incredible happened. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and he tied his garment tightly around his waist. With supernatural strength, Elijah began to run. His feet struck the ground with divine power, and he outran Ahab's chariot, racing across the storm-swept plains faster than the king's finest horses. Such was the power of Elijah, a prophet of fire, a man who called down flames from heaven and outran the swiftest steeds of Israel, a man whose faith shook the heavens and turned the hearts of a nation back to God. Elijah, the prophet of fire who ran faster than any horse,